Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we've got Elie Smolkin, the director of photography for American Sports Story, Aaron Hernandez. Elie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
I was so excited for this show. I'm not even a Patriots fan. I mean, it's not that I'm not a Patriots fan. I'm from Boston. I certainly want them to be successful. I just don't follow it. But I keep getting captivated by the story of the Patriots. Like that, I think it was a Apple TV documentary called Dynasty or something. And then we had this with the Aaron Hernandez story. But I feel like, similar to Dynasty, this show just goes way beyond football. You don't have to be a Patriots fan. You don't have to be interested in football. You don't have to be interested in sports at all. But the story there is incredible. And of course, it looks amazing. I mean, you guys did an incredible, incredible job. So got to say that up front. I was a fan.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no, I really appreciate it. I went to college in Boston right around when the Patriots kind of had their dynasty. So, I grew up on the West Coast, but I sort of became a Patriots fan. So this was exciting. And I played sports all my life. So that was exciting too. But I just loved that it was, I always call it like the anti-sports story in a way. Like, if Rudy is about the guy who couldn't quite make it, but you're really rooting for him and the sport lifts him up, this is like the guy who had all the potential in the world, and it's the institution of the sport itself and the people around him, and his own faults that sort of come crashing down. And that's what really excited me about it. It wasn't your typical, the beats, he's going to be great and here's how he becomes great. He was already amazing. It's more about the psyche, the personality, the story, the trauma, and what playing sports all your life is like, and it's brutal, and it was just exciting. I just really wanted to be a part of it.
I can tell, listening to you just in the first couple of minutes, that you have such an interest and excitement about telling this story, which is great. I mean, I kind of feel like that's essential for cinematographers, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love my job, but we work really long hours. We're on shows for a very long time. And so if you don't like what you're making, that's a hard slog. So I try really hard to pick things that excite me, that I love the story, that I feel like I can tell a visual story with, and that feels important to tell. And then that just makes the long hours enjoyable instead of a slog.
Can you describe to me what your overall vision for the visual style of the series was?
Yeah, early on, we had some big meetings, with our producers, with Ryan, with our showrunner Stu, and all the sort of like department heads, production designer, costume designer, myself, and we really tried to craft a story, because you kind of know, this is kind of rare where the beginning, middle, and end in a way. His career, and so it was nice, especially having the scripts and the outline written ahead of time, which isn't always the case in TV. We were able to sort of craft both a color story and a visual story that we sort of all came together to try to tell. So red became really important. Ryan sort of, it was important to him to sort of pick red as this color for trauma and for the CTE and for the drugs and the paranoia. So that doesn't necessarily mean like always red light. It's sometimes production design takes that off, sometimes costumes, sometimes both. So it was about sort of crafting that. And then the other thing that we really wanted to tell was this sort of progression of a career. I sort of felt like there's this really great opportunity for a visual arc where you could start in Connecticut, where we had sort of talked about these gray tones, green, browns, earth tones, something that feels like mud. He's kind of in this small town, working class. And then he gets to Florida and he's in this sort of like super saturated, aspirational, neons, colorful wealth. He's allowed to get away with anything. He gets drafted by the Patriots, which is like this idea of the Patriot way. You're in the NFL, you're in the spotlight, it's white light, it's clean, it's almost clinical. And then as things start to fall apart, we started to thread in a little bit of green. And by the time he gets into prison, not to spoil anything, then we're back into those muddy tones again, and you sort of have, the blue jumpsuits and the taupe walls and sort of this gray light again. So we wanted to kind of play that story that he kind of starts and ends in the same, very different place, but in a sort of same color story. And then visually, for the lenses, something we talked about early on was this idea of the sort of like the degradation of someone's mind, like part of the idea is, this idea of CTE and what it does to your brain.
Yeah. And I loved the way that you handled CTE in the show, because you had to do something different. And we've all kind of seen that snorri cam look that people often would associate with like drug use or being sort of out of your wits.
Sure.
You didn't go that approach. You did something different. You can't quite put your finger on it. So I'd love to hear from you. How did you actually shoot and accomplish the CTE shots? How did you represent CTE in the show?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked with Panavision New York, and what I wanted to do was sort of, one of the main ideas for the CTE was to use 3 sets of lenses. So our first set was like a much cleaner, the Artiste lenses, which aren't like the sharpest, but they're pretty sharp and they're a little cleaner. And we used those at the very beginning in Connecticut before his first concussion. And as soon as he had his first concussion on the field, we transferred over to these VA primes that were tuned by Jeff and his team in Panavision. And the idea was to start putting like aberrations on the edges, sort of the same idea of like when I had a concussion, it's like you lose some of your peripheral vision. So we sort of made it a little bit softer there. We started to make them flare more easily, so they'd be more sensitive to light. We shot a little more wide open. And then eventually in episode 5, at the end, when he takes a really big hit right before the stoplight scene, we switched over to anamorphic. So we kind of took that another step, and we used the Ultra Panatar 2s, which are sort of a variation of these VA lenses. So the idea was like to use the same glass, but you think of like, having like almost like astigmatism, like, your vision's just changed even further to, degraded, I like anamorphic too. I don't know if I would call it degraded, but the idea that it's shifted even further into shallower depth of field, more aberrations. We also shifted it so things like you could get everybody in focus in a line, but the idea was like the edges would never resolve. You would have to have somebody a few steps back or step forward if you're going to have in the line.
Yeah, and the sound design helps a lot too.
Oh my God,
because you you can still hear people murmuring in the background, but it really does, when you watch these CTE scenes, it's invasive in a way. Like you are right in his face. You can see in his expression that he's struggling with what's reality and what isn't. Yeah. And I think it was a really interesting approach to kind of have the degradation in the frame, a little bit of blurring going on, but it wasn't a typical vignetting look. It was a very unique look I've never really seen before.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, part of it, yeah, you're right. I mean, Josh, who plays Aaron, is incredible. So, I mean, 90% of it is just him and doing the magic that he does. But, and then the sound design as well. But yeah, we did that. And then this idea that this is Aaron's story, and we just really wanted to be with him, so there's a lot of close-ups where we travel with him. And that was a combination. We had Kyle and Ryan on Steadicam at different episodes who were incredible, tracking with him. And we also had Chris.
Those are your camera ops?
Yeah. Kyle Wolschlager and Ryan Tusing we had because of the strike, we sort of shot for a year. We stopped in the middle. So we had, for the first half, Kyle, and the second half, Ryan. So there's a lot of tracking with them. And then also our B operator is a Ronin operator. So in certain situations, Chris Aaron, who's our B operator, was doing these Ronin shots. And so a lot of it was like in the football and also in the club. And a lot of these CT moments was the idea of like being right with Josh and moving wherever he goes and sort of staying in his eye line and, being up close on a wider lens. Yeah, like you were saying, kind of like a snorri cam idea, but without the rig and more just sort of free floating with him, a little looser with that idea. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the Snorri cam is it's such a, I don't even know how to describe it. It's such a like tight shot. It's not tight. That's the wrong word. It's locked. It's a locked off shot. So the fact that you didn't go that way and you still kept some movement in it, I think it just made it feel more realistic.
Yeah. No,
Especially
I'm with
since,
you.
I mean, I never had a concussion. It sounds like you did. That must have informed the way that you worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and nothing like what Aaron went through, but yes, yeah, I definitely informed it, and that was a big conversation throughout prep with several of the writers and the showrunner and people who've experienced that, and yeah, it's something that we just wanted people to feel while they're watching it, I guess, and not just to make it feel like you're with Aaron and you're experiencing it with him, if that makes sense.
It does. And when you're creating these scenes, sort of emulating, representing CTE with Aaron Hernandez, did you like bring in consultants? Did you talk to other players? Like, were there any steps along the way where you got some feedback about the way you were representing it?
Yeah, I know that there was a extensive research for the scripts, like for a very long time, and it was based off of the original podcasts that the Boston Globe did. So I know there's tons of research there. I know one of the writers or writer consultants was an ex-player as well. So I know all that was there. On set, not so much. On set it was mostly we took in prep and we sort of applied it and we tested everything. Like it's not like we pulled these lenses or these tricks out. Out of a surprise. There's extensive tests and stuff, and we did use a few other pieces like tilt shifts and things, some portrait lenses and things like that. We wanted to go really extreme with that look, but yeah, not on the day.
What camera package did you choose?
So our primary camera package was the Sony Venice 2. So we had those, and then we also carried a red Komodo for some really small work. So we had like a helmet cam thing for some of the hits. So we built the Komodo into a helmet that could be carried around and sort of smash into our other stunt players. And then we used it for some car rigs as well. But
why not stick to the Sony family if you're looking for like small rigs like that?
I've used the Rialto in the past, but what comes with it, like all the things that have to go on your back, the idea was to be able to like run the plays in the helmet. And so the Komodo is just so small. It was like basically a battery belt, transmitter. It could still have our full frame lenses. And then we just shoved it in the camera or in the helmet and ran with it. That was the real answer.
Well, there you go. I want to talk a little bit more about camera movement because you are telling a sports story, but you're also telling a drama, and there's quite a bit of both. I think the dramatic scenes are so realistic feeling, and you really kind of almost forget that you're watching a sports story until the sports scenes come and all the gameplay comes. I'd like to talk to you about the way that you approach camera motion for kind of both of those feelings that you want the audience to have.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if we had a different approach for the sports stuff. A lot of the games and game changers, the guys the men and women who run the football, they basically have like a team where they bring ex-football players in, and there are sort of our stunt players. And Mike, who sort of designs the plays, most of them, because they're historical plays, he's trying to run what actually happened. And so we took this approach of like, it was sort of a mixture. We wanted to keep it Aaron's story, but we also wanted the football side of it. So we would basically approach, the first setup would be like a football approach, right? So a lot of the NFL games, we went to Florida as a separate unit because there's an empty stadium there. And we brought in some NFL Films guys as well. So we had like 5 camera teams. We had our A camera, which came from the show. Ryan came with us. And then we brought some NFL film guys. And what we did is we started in our wide stadium positions. So we basically shot the play as you saw it on TV. There'd be like a cart cam position. There'd be like the high wide. And these are the guys, like a couple of them, Bob and Steve, they were at the Super Bowl. So like they're also doing the sort of tracking shots of like a pass that lands in a catch. Then we move into more of our handheld NFL Films documentary style, which was still from the outside, but doing a little more intimate shots. And then the last step would be of this play would be we'd get Ryan in there and we would do those close up with Josh, running the plays, getting in his face, and we'd sneak in a couple other cameras that could do like, you know, the catch or like the long ball tracking. And so we'd approach each play like that so that when you're watching it, you see that historical play. And then you're also at the right moments editorially, you are feeling this visceral feeling of the hit, or what Josh is feeling or what Aaron's feeling when he has to line up on the field as a running back for the first time.
Yeah.
So that's the sports, you know, that's a very long-winded way of saying how we wanted to approach the sports side.
Well, before you even move to the drama,
Yeah,
I noticed, sorry, we're getting a big motorcycle coming through. You probably can't hear it, but I can. Before we even get to the drama side, I want to ask you about it looks like some of the game footage is indiscernible from actual game footage. It looks like you're just using total different camera package. I was almost questioning, like, are they going to the archives and using the actual footage, or is this new footage?
Oh, that's cool. So for the NFL stuff, it was all us, for all sorts of reasons. The Florida stuff is a mixture. They were able to get some archive footage, and that, you know, kind of came in the process. It was more in Greta's episodes than who's our other DP than my episodes. But we did a mix where we shot, you know, some stuff that felt like Josh playing Aaron could be in the Florida games. But for the NFL, it's all us, and that was sort of the idea. We got some lenses. We were still shooting Sony Venice, but we got some more primo zooms and some doublers and things. We also had this incredible 1600 mil anamorphic lens that went on for some shots of Belichick through the crowd. But we really tried to do a version that felt like the game, that were on these sort of longer lenses from extremely far away. And then we also tried to mix it in with our sort of storytelling footage. But it was all Venice, just a different stop, a different lens, but yeah, same camera.
It's pretty amazing, because you do get tricked when you're watching it. And I think it's so great because you're watching it as you would if you were watching TV, if you were actually just watching the game on TV. Like it takes you in and out of the moment in a really interesting way. So I thought that was really cool. And it's wild to hear that it's just the Sony Venice and it just changes in format and coloring. That's kind of cool. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
I love that when I'm surprised.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Good.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear.
Let's talk about the way that you approached the more dramatic scenes, because Aaron's life doesn't, at least so far, I've only seen 6 episodes out of 9, but so far it seems like his life is falling apart outside of the field, not on the field. So there's quite a bit going on, quite a story arc when we're not on the field. And I'd love to hear about the way that you handled that.
Yeah, I think that started with our pilot, our first 2 episodes. We just sort of did episode blocks. So our first 2 episode block was with Carl Franklin, who's an awesome director and I've worked with in the past. And again, I think this goes back to the idea that this is Aaron's story, and we just wanted to tell it where you're with him the whole time. You're experiencing what he's experiencing. So that translated into both a lot of camera movement and a lot of close-ups. You know, we wanted this idea that you're moving with him wherever he goes. So if he's moving, we're moving. If he's stationary, we're stationary. And then all these sort of shots that sort of try to get inside of his head, if that makes sense. These close-ups are off-angle close-ups that sort of feel like we're experiencing things with him. And then we continued that through. I mean, you know, we had those kind of rules, but they're sort of meant to be broken. So every director that comes in, you know, if there's a good reason, we sort of, you know, throw it all out the window. But I think for 5 and 6 with Maggie, who I've worked with a bunch and who's also amazing, these were huge. This was a huge episode block. So much happens in it that I don't want to spoil, but it's a lot of what the sort of the bad thing, you know, the sort of the sad and bad things that Aaron's famous for happen in 5 and 6, as well as a lot of the football moments.
Well, we can talk about it. It's not a spoiler. We have to assume anybody listening to this episode is up to date, because who knows when they're going to hear it. And I do want to focus on those 2 episodes, because I ask all of our guests,
Yeah.
You know, what are the episodes? What are the moments you really want to focus on? And you immediately said, let's hold off on this interview until episode 6 comes out. And after watching episode 6, I was like, yes, I understand why. Tell us what it is about that episode or that block of 5 and 6 that was challenging for you, or that you just particularly feel, you know, good about and want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what happens in 5 and 6, but especially 6, I mean, we were talking about it briefly before we started, that it feels like it is a movie amount of stuff that happens, you know, in 54 minutes. It's not only the football sequences, but it's also the famous Cure nightclub spilling of the drink, the alleged drive-by shooting. It's you know, Aaron gets injured. There's a giant montage that happens where he not only is suffering from, you know, the concussions and the brain trauma, but also starts to take Vicodin and pills to help with pain. It's sort of the beginning of this idea that we've talked about of this sort of, it's not just CTE, it's also drug use, it's also paranoia, it's the breakdown. And it kind of, that sequence kind of starts at the end of 5, where there's a tragic, I find it a really heartbreaking scene where he's driving home after taking this big hit in a game, and he drives home alone, and he doesn't know how to get home. You know, he's at a stoplight, doesn't know if he should go left or right. And that's the beginning of the confusion. And that's the beginning of like him not quite, you know, you start to wonder how much he knew was real and how much he wasn't sure was actually happening. And that sort of translates for the rest of the series. It sort of launches what happens after 6. So, you know, we knew we had these huge sequences. We had a lot of night work. You know, the Cure nightclub in itself it was a 3-story club in Jersey City that we rigged with all sorts of moving lights and stair tubes. And again, this color story kind of played in. And there was this idea of like, he goes out, he does drugs, he starts drinking. And as that night progresses and there's loud music, you know, he starts to break down a little bit. And we really wanted to show that with camera movement, with wide lenses, with these moving lights, the sensitivity to light. And then eventually we thread in some of that red light before the drink spills. So it just sort of feels like it's part of the club. He goes from sort of this black light sequence to red light, and then he has a confrontation. And then from that confrontation, you know, we go outside. Sherrod, his friend, tries to cool him down, and that's when it's not really a car chase, but it kind of is. He follows this other car, shoots the people in the car, takes off, and then has to hide the vehicle and the evidence. And so that unleashes this whole chain of events, but it also unleashes this sort of tragedy, because shortly after he gets this massive deal and a huge contract, and like you sort of think like, if the events had been the opposite, would any of them happen? You know, would his whole life be different? But because he does this terrible thing, or allegedly does this terrible thing, and then gets this contract, then he becomes this sort of paranoid when is he going to get caught? You know, and that starts to unravel, and it's really sad to watch. It's sad to make.
What I found interesting and watch. What I found interesting about that nightclub scene is it was the first time, at least in the first 6 episodes, where you approached a off the field scene the same as you did an on the field scene. You still had all the stimuli. You had all sort of the people moving around. You had the oversaturation of lighting and sound and all stuff going on. It was the first time that you actually saw him break down off the field, not just on. And I thought that was it was as if you employed the same tactics for the gameplay as you did for that club scene. At least that's how I was interpreting it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I don't know if that was intentional, but that makes a lot of sense, because we were, you know, shooting it all and prepping it all around the same time. But I don't know if we did that on purpose, but that's cool that it came that way. Yeah.
Did you have any particular challenges with that episode or that scene that, you know, you never faced before, you learned something from?
Yeah, I mean, it was just logistically really challenging. I mean, the crew was incredible. There's so many locations in that episode, and they're not easy rigs. You know, the lighting and grip team to have to rig like, because we did 5 and 6 together. There's two clubs, so they're rigging and lighting two clubs, and not in a simple way with all sorts of lighting cues that our board op Corinne had to sort of do because in advance, or at least get 90% there, because when you go to shoot it, you don't want to spend your time lighting 3 floors and picking out all these, the colors and when they come and which lights go to what colors. So that's all in prep. And then you have to sort of trust that our rigging team can do it. And then on the day you make minor tweaks and you go. But at the same time they're doing that, they're rigging, the parking lot scene, night exterior, which is like three or four blocks, city blocks. And then the next night we had to go do the car chase, which is like 10 city blocks. So just the people involved, the prep involved, the time, they did such a great job. And the organization on them and everything was always ready. It was just really impressive. So yeah, that was its own challenge, I think. And then in the moment, what I think is really important is to have that kind of prep and infrastructure built in. So in the moment I can be with Maggie, the director, and I can be with the cast. And when our plans change or when some blocking changes to do something more interesting, we're free to make those changes. We're free to sort of just be in the moment and find those happy accidents instead of, trying to catch up. So yeah, I mean, that was the challenge, was just sort of all the logistics of being ready for all these locations and then executing them in a interesting way.
I think one of the things that, cinematographers like yourself that are working on series can really sort of teach other people that are, maybe doing commercials or just doing corporate videos. There is something that you do that I think the people that are doing work like I do, and I think a lot of the audience could learn from, and that's how you're collaborating with so many different people, because you're working with different directors to pull together an entire series. You're, basically co-DPs with another director of photography working on your opposite episodes. And I think, though I'm not doing large series like you are, I'm working with new directors every day. Sometimes I am a director. I'm working with ad agencies. I'm working with, art directors, and you get the creative directors. You have the actual director. So there's a lot of similarities in at least the way that there's collaboration between cinematographer and the team. Is there anything you can say? Could you talk to that at all about the way that you approach these working relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think in some ways it is the same. I do commercials and movies as well. And I think with TV series, it just tends to be the same thing for longer. So it's really just, it's about managing that organization. I think it's also just about, I mean, maybe it's cliche to say, but it's about communication and kindness. Like what I love about movie making is it's a bunch of people all working towards one, hopefully one thing, one vision, one idea. And everybody's there to do that. And everybody's hopefully extremely talented. They're proficient in their job. So it becomes about understanding that, they have reasons for why they want to do X, Y, and Z, and you have reasons why, and that you should be working together and having those communications and those conversations in a way to get to the ultimate goal. And I think, there are shoots where there's egos involved, and that I think is always the sort of the thing that holds it up, is that everybody, there's certain people that think their job, their position, their department is more important. Whereas I think if you can come with a plan in a kind way, in an understanding way, in a good explanation, you can find these great, you have to be open to the ideas that other people have, because then it tends to create something you didn't even think of that is better. And I think if you have the capacity to be open to that, you make something extra special, if that makes sense. You need to have a plan, but you also need to be open, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you have to be flexible, but there has to be a time, maybe it wasn't this show, maybe it never happened, but if something like this happened, let's say you're working on a show, you're doing block, episode 1 and 2, and then you come back for 4 and 5, whatever. Different directors. You must be thinking to yourself, like, I know this show. Like, I know what it looks like. I was there developing it from the beginning. And like, how do you sort of like infuse the fact that you have experience developing the show with a vision that may not necessarily jive with what you've created up to that point?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I do, especially with TV series for that reason, with the multiple directors and DPs and everything, is I'd create like an image booklet off the top that is in collaboration with all those departments, in collaboration with the producers and the writers and the first director. And then that becomes kind of like that with the dailies becomes like a template for incoming directors. So they'll come in and they'll get like our visual lookbook, they'll get the dailies, and in there will be like a camera description. This is how we usually approach camera. These are how we usually approach framing, lighting, colors. And again, like those, it's a blueprint, but it's not like it. I think on a TV show or on any project, it can't be the word because things change and people, you have to be adaptable, but it is a working blueprint. And I think it's really helpful because when I say red, it might not be what you imagine as red. Or when I say, a close up, it could be, this, it could be this. So to have a visual reference that's in a booklet that's already been agreed upon by our bosses, then everybody comes in and they sort of say, okay, that's what you mean by this is a close-up on Aaron and that's what we want, or that's the color red or whatever. So that helps, I think. But yeah, there's always discussion.
Well, I imagine directors probably come in, they want to put their stamp on it, they want it to be unique, they want their episodes to be the best episodes. Who wouldn't?
Sure.
And sometimes that may mean let's shake it up a little bit. And I can imagine that there's uncomfortable conversations here and there where you have to kind of temper those expectations and be like, hey, great idea. However, maybe that's not your responsibility, but if it is, I'm curious how you handle that.
Yeah, it is. I think it is our responsibility. Like if you're going to do a whole show and you've already set up the look, it is a responsibility to shepherd that look throughout the series. So I think it becomes a conversation. I think it becomes a conversation with the director. It's usually in prep though. Like I think it's probably a bad time to do that in front of you're doing a blocking and you're in front of the whole cast and crew. That's probably not the time. But in prep,
noted.
Yeah. But in prep, when you're going through your shot list, or you're at a location, or you're in the costume department or whatever, that's a good time to explain why you do things or don't do things. And again, like you can break those. Like I'm all for a director coming in and being like, yeah, I know you do it this way, but because of what's happening in the story, I really want to do it this way. And if it makes sense, then it becomes a conversation with, you don't want to surprise the showrunner with something completely different either. So again, it's like in prep, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And you pitch it as an idea. Again, there are things that happen on the day that you just go with your gut. And I think you can't ignore your gut, but yeah, it's in prep. You have to have prep.
The show is created by Ryan Murphy. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many shows does this guy do? It's unbelievable.
Yes.
It's incredible. Have you worked with him before in any other projects?
No, this was my first time. And it was great. Yeah.
He tends to use similar people. Once you're in that family, you tend to stay there for a while. So you might be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I would love that. No, this was an awesome opportunity, and I was really happy to be a part of it.
I can only imagine. My God.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear about mistakes that you've made.
Sure.
We all make them all the time. As a viewer, you're watching this show, you're like, oh my God, this looks amazing. I would love to work on a project like this. How can I improve my work to get to this level, yada, yada. But you're looking at it and you probably see some mistakes, some problems, some things you would do different. And I'd love to hear, maybe a mistake you made on this project that you would do differently or something you learned from. Could be this, could be anything else. And it could be small. It could be the smallest little thing. But I think that's how we learn.
Yeah, I got to think back. It's a good question. I mean, a big believer in taking projects that feel challenging and that you have to take risks. Like I think if you get comfortable and you do the thing that you know how to do and you always do, then it gets complacent, it gets a little bit boring. So I think in general, you need to try things and push yourself out of your comfort zone. I think that normally that creates something, not necessarily a mistake, just something you're not expecting, which is usually a good thing. I'm trying to think, like, this was a while ago, so, but I'm sure I made a million mistakes. I mean, that's that's what happens every day, and I think that's okay. Because again, you learn from them, and sometimes those mistakes are what makes something special. I wish I had a good answer for you. I can't.
Well, it might have felt like a mistake at the beginning, but then you're like, damn, this actually worked out really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually how it goes. Well,
when you think back on your experience making the show, I know it's been a year.
Yeah.
What is a takeaway that you were like, I learned this lesson from this show, and I'm going to now carry this on to my next project?
I mean, I definitely learned a lot about shooting sports, like I think, we started with the high school stuff, and that was kind of by design because we also wanted like things to feel faster, more intricate and better as Aaron grew, right? So high school to college to NFL. NFL should feel like the biggest guys, the fastest plays, the biggest hits. So, the high school one, we had a lot of ideas, but you sort of learn what works and what doesn't, how to track, what tools you use. We had a little, it's like basically a remote control car with a camera on it called the Agito. And then we also had like a traditional, like Grip Tricks camera car with a remote head on it. And what we found after the first couple of days is that generally you don't, the little camera car is good because with what we wanted to do, we wanted to be on the field with the players, moving with them, like maybe following Aaron as he runs. And when you're this, this wide instead of as wide as a car, you can go through players and they can avoid you, and that doesn't work as well with a traditional camera car. So we learned that kind of stuff for sure. And then the other thing that I met a ton of amazing crew. I hadn't worked in New York and New Jersey for probably 8 years, and I had an almost completely new crew, and I'd work with them anywhere. I mean, that's one thing I learned. Like, they're just great people.
We're good over here on the East Coast.
Yeah, great. I love
we know what we're doing.
I never thought you didn't, but you always when you hire a completely new team, you never know. You're going off of vibes of an interview, but nobody in an interview says like, oh, no, actually, I'm a terrible key grip.
But sometimes you can tell during interviews.
Yeah. But no, they were all just, I mean, not just hardworking, not just talented, but like genuinely sweet and funny people, and that was really a joy. I mean, that really kept us going through the long days.
So this show is in the rearview mirror, which is good and bad, I'm sure.
Yeah. Bittersweet.
But I want to talk about life after this show. What are your personal goals in filmmaking? People look at you and they're thinking, this guy, he did it. He's there. He did it. He's doing a major TV show. It's like, this is the life that I would love to have and I'm working towards. But you're in it. And there's always room for improvement. I'm sure you're always thinking about the next thing for you professionally.
Sure.
What is it? What are your professional goals in this industry?
Yeah, I think that's the hard thing about, one of the hard things about what we do and about the freelance world. It's like, that was an amazing project. So thankful to be a part of it. I think for the next one, it's like, how do you grow? How do you do something that feels, for me, it's about telling a really good story. Like, that's what I want to find something where when I read it, you connect to it, you see it in your mind's eye. You can completely visualize it. You understand that it's a story worth telling. And those are hard to find. I think this one was, I was, like I said at the beginning, I was very excited to read it, to be a part of it. But it is really hard to, when you get these scripts, it's hard sometimes to tell if you're excited about like a moment in the script or you're excited about going on another job, or, hey, this one has a budget, let's go do it. Or are you excited about the story and, after 4 days on the job and it's, you're in your 12th hour, are you loving what you're making? And that's the trick. And I think that's what I'm looking for next is, I was fortunate the next thing I did after Sports Story is not out yet was one of those. It was just like an incredible experience, just the most incredible cast, incredible crew. The scripts were so, so good. And when you're in that moment, you have to appreciate it because they're not all that way. They're just, that's what I'm looking for. A good story.
Last thing I want to ask you is, what do you think it was about you that got you hired on this show?
Wow. I don't know. I think you'll have to ask them for sure. But like I said, I was really excited about this one. This was an interview one. This, even though I'd worked with Carl before, I hadn't worked with Ryan before. I hadn't worked with Stu, our showrunner, or Brad and Nina, our other awesome EPs. So there was an interview process, and I just tried to come to the table with some storytelling ideas, some things that I connected to the script, to the story. Like I said, I played sports growing up, and I just really liked that it was a sports story, but it's also just a very interesting story about this one person and how his life was affected by the sport and everything around it. And I tried my best to convey that, and I was excited and brought ideas, and I guess they liked them. I don't know.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Elie, thank you so much for joining us today. The show is so good.
Oh, thank you.
It's called, what is it called? American Sports Story, Aaron Hernandez.
Yep.
By the time you listen to this, I think 7 out of 9 episodes will be out. And of course, maybe the whole thing, depending on when you listen to it, but check it out.
Yeah.
Anything you want to plug, website, social, anything you want people to check out to learn more about you?
Yeah, my website's my name, eliesmolkin.com, and my Instagram is also my name, Elie_Smolkin. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been really fun.
You as well. Thank you so much. And of course, all you guys watching, please do, if you are listening to the episode and you're like, what does Elie look like? I want to know. I want to see what he looks like when he's talking. Good news is we filmed the whole thing so you can see it on YouTube. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to Go Creative Show on any podcast app and check out Go Creative Show for this episode and all previous episodes. Elie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.